Hello and welcome to another episode of Discernment Now. My name is Rich Van Every. This is Kevin Anthony, and we're excited to share more insight with you about the current events happening mainly in the United States, but some of these may span over, and we are just exercising discernment, which is an ongoing practice that I think we all should be participating in. So please join us and leave a comment. We're really wanting feedback and excited to continue to expand this show. So what have we got on the list this week, Kev?
Well, we cannot do a show today without recognizing the fact that it is indeed September 11th today. And rather than just mentioning that it's September 11th and wanting to honor what happened that day, it's important to remind everybody who is watching this that 9/11 was an inside job. There are mountains, plural, of evidence to show that that indeed was the case. So it was not, 15 hijackers who couldn't fly planes, even small planes, pulling off complex maneuvers that even seasoned pilots couldn't pull off, things that pilots have said were literally impossible. The evidence is so big. If you haven't reviewed it in a while and you're still on the fence as to whether or not this was perpetrated by our own government, please take the time to go research it. I know you don't want to hear it. You don't want to think about it. There are still to this day people going, I can't believe that our government would ever do that to us. Well, they did. They didn't act alone. They had help, but they did. It is by far, in my opinion, the biggest false flag attack that has ever happened. Not the only one, but the biggest one that's ever happened. So we have to make sure that people understand that they were 100% lied to. Everything from beginning to end. Even the people on the 9/11 Commission publicly stated that they were obstructed, that evidence was withheld from them. They don't even believe their own conclusions in the report.
Brutal. Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, this is really important because I feel like it can open people's minds and understanding to, even though this happened over 20 years ago, we are still experiencing some similar type events. And, this term conspiracy theorist loves to still get thrown around. And I think it would be good for us to dissect what that actually really means. So conspiracy, how would you define conspiracy, Kevin? Is it simple enough?
Conspiracy is just several people getting together for a common goal.
Okay.
That's all it is.
And a theory is just a speculation, in a sense, proposing something.
It's an idea that has yet to be proven.
Mm-hmm. So we're past that point with this issue, right? I mean, you can say definitively there was more than just one or two motives. There were many motives in this incident. Mm-hmm. And, let's just call it conspiracy fact then, perhaps,
Yeah, well, it is. And the important part, again, is people have to realize that this has been part of a larger plan, that this was planned by forces within our government as well as outside of our government, to basically usher in, the Patriot Act was just the beginning of ushering in the police state control system, but that was one of the main reasons. There, of course, are other reasons. As you stated, they never do anything with only one reason. So remember the billions, or I think it was trillions actually, that were announced missing the day before. Well, the documents and all for all of that were in Building 7. Building 7, by the way, if you are not aware or don't remember, was the third World Trade Center building that collapsed at free fall speed, even though it was not hit by a plane. It only had a few small office fires on a couple of floors, but it fell. Not only did it fall, it fell at free fall speed. So that was obviously a controlled demolition, as were the other two buildings as well. Yeah. But, just the idea is keep in mind all of that, because that is continuing to this day. We should never forget about it, and we should still hold those responsible accountable.
Yeah.
I also want to say another reason why it's important to bring up today is because Joe Biden is the first president since 9/11 to not be in New York at Ground Zero on 9/11 to honor the worst terrorist attack false flag attack, really. But
He's
even
busy.
if you believe
He's too busy for that
story, let's say you believe it was a terrorist attack by some, people from another part of the world. It's still one of the worst tragedies that has ever happened in American history, and every president has made sure to be there to honor that, but not Joe Biden.
No.
Now, of course, some will make excuses. Well, he was just over in Vietnam and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they know these schedules ahead of time. It's not like they didn't know 9/11 was coming up. They could have planned around that. So that just gives you an idea as to how much Joe Biden gives a crap, which is not at all.
Yeah. And before we move on, let's do an honorable mention on this issue, because given I've only been, choking down my red pill, as I like to call it, for the last several years, really. Kevin, on the other hand, has decades of deep diving and choking on that red pill. And David Icke's 800-page book is one of the things that you read on this matter. Is that not right? So
that is correct. It's somewhere around 800 pages. I think it's called The Trigger, if I recall. And
it's a good read, I heard. So hey,
well,
if you ever want to dive in real deep.
David Icke is considered a controversial figure, although in the last couple of years he's been largely vindicated, because so much of what he had been writing about for 20 years came true when COVID happened. All the stuff he said was going to happen all came true during COVID.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, having read that book, that it is extremely well researched.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of research that went into producing that was pretty phenomenal. I mean, there are so many details in that book, documented details, straight from government documents, straight from FOIA requests and all that stuff, that I guarantee you have never heard about.
Amazing.
So I would recommend, if you're interested in this subject, for sure to read that book.
Moral of the story is you don't know what you don't know. And as we exercise discernment, the important thing is to keep an open mind and, say, yeah, maybe. And then just carry on, connect dots over time. So what's next?
Well, while we're talking about false flags,
oh boy,
this next story has some relation to January 6th. So apparently some activists stormed the office of House Leader Kevin McCarthy. They were protesting. They wanted him to vote for a particular piece of legislation. Now, keep in mind, breaking into the building and the office is the exact same thing that the people on January 6th were accused of. Entering the Capitol building.
Yeah, which they opened the doors for them, so that wasn't...
Yes, and then that's on video. You can watch the police opening the doors. You can watch them escorting the people around the Capitol building. You can watch them saying, we'll let you into the chamber as long as you don't hurt anything. Yeah, we've seen all of that. But here's the reason why I bring it up. Just last week, somebody who was arrested for January 6th, who was not even in Washington, D.C., on January 6th, not physically present, was just sentenced to over 20 years in prison for apparently being part of January 6th. So my question to all of you is, what do you think the chances are that these people who just stormed the building and entered illegal, what do you think will happen to them? My guess is pretty much nothing. And if it is anything, they'll get a fine or probation or, maybe a year in prison. Do you think they'll get 20 years in prison for that? No, they won't. And the reason I bring that up is because you need to understand the double standard that's happening here. People in the January 6th case, whether or not you believe January 6th was an actual insurrection, whether or not you believe any of that, you have to realize that the sentences that are being handed to these people are so far above and beyond anything even reasonable for what they actually did.
Oh man.
That it's blatantly absurd. What it amounts to is imprisoning your political opponents. And even though these people aren't necessarily running for political office, what it's doing is sending a chilling message to anybody else. If you dare oppose us, we will throw you in prison for the rest of your life. That's what it is about. They are literally trying to make examples out of these people to scare the rest of the American citizens into never taking a stand for their rights or freedom again. That's what it's really all about. So watch what happens to these activists. I can almost guarantee you it will be nothing, and you'll never hear of it again.
Yeah.
And they'll be back out on the street just like all the BLM protesters were.
Yeah, this is crossing the line from political theater to political circus, in my opinion. So what a shame. Yeah, the hypocrisy just is ongoing, never-ending, and fuels the overwhelm and the confusion, and perhaps just continues to justify and also put people in what I like to consider irrational fear, because if you're on a mission from God, you fear no man, and you're going to do the right thing no matter what. So, keep the faith out there, people. As bad as it looks, it can always get better as long as you believe. So that was a good one. All right, what's next?
All right, so next is something that came out just about, I think it was last week, which is something called Project 2025. And I don't know if you've heard of this or not, but a group of conservative organizations have gotten together and created this Project 2025. And I'll read to you the description of it. Project 2025 is both a policy agenda and recruitment effort intended to reshape the federal bureaucracy by instituting sweeping policy changes and replacing tens of thousands of federal workers with vetted, trained, ideologically conservative employees ready to execute an extreme makeover of the executive branch. So what do they want to do? Basically, they want to clean house. They want to come in. They want to not just replace a lot of the entrenched deep state bureaucrats, but they also want to eliminate a lot of the positions. So really just going in there with a machete and just hacking bits that are not needed out. And then the ones that are needed, basically replacing them with people who will actually honor the Constitution.
Wow.
It is quite a radical plan.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that many on the left will freak out when they hear about this. But it's absolutely what needs to happen. Now, I would say, and I don't know that this is the case with these particular people in this project, but I would say that as long as they're not replacing them with ideologues on the other extreme, then this is a good idea.
Yeah.
What
we're just trying to get back to center here, people. To come back to the Constitution, whereas we're so off.
Right. What we don't want is one side, one party getting in power and then arresting all of their political opponents and throwing them in prison and replacing them all with their own cronies.
Right.
And then they get ousted and then the other one gets back in and they do the same thing. We don't want to be flip-flopping back and forth.
But if you're guilty of treason, justice should be served. And it will be.
Right. Well,
on your day of judgment, if not.
If you're not doing your job, if you're not honoring the Constitution and the laws of the country, then you need to be removed. It's as simple as that. And the reality is in my opinion, you could get rid of 90% of what we call government, and you should, because most of it is actually unconstitutional. The federal government technically only has the power given to them in the Constitution. So the Constitution says the federal government can do this, this, and this. And then it says anything not expressly granted to the federal government here in the Constitution either falls to the states or the people. Well, the federal government has grown and grown and grown over the time since the Constitution was created, and they have usurped all sorts of power that they are not constitutionally allowed to have. Now, a lot of people think this is good because they've grown to rely on the nanny state and they want government to manage every part of their lives. But those of us who value sovereignty and freedom understand that life is always better without government. The reason why government can't ever really solve your problems is because government is your problem. They are the ones creating the problems, which is why the problems never get solved. So, in my opinion, I think we should get rid of the overwhelming majority of the federal government and move it back towards the Constitution, which is you only have these limited powers, and get the rest away from the federal government. I don't know how far this Project 2025 is going to go. We'll have to wait and see if they actually even get into office and if they can do any of this stuff.
Well, if you're like me, you're thinking like, why would they publicly announce this? Because that to me seems like a little bit of a, this type of operation you would imagine would be done under wraps, no?
Well,
You know,
Probably
like,
the
why
reason...
advertise it to the people? Like, we're not going to actually be involved in this, right? Or could we
well,
help the momentum of this
yes,
idea?
that's where it's going. This is
Okay.
why they want to talk about it publicly, because it is my opinion, just from observing the landscape, the cultural landscape and the political landscape, that what we call the far left are actually a small minority, and that what we would call the conservative right is actually the majority. Now, not the far conservative right, not the neocon conservatives, warhawk people, but people that consider themselves, well, conservative, for lack of a better term, right? So, you know, most of the country that considers themselves on the conservative side. So I think they are the majority of the country. And I think by announcing something like this to people and getting them excited about it will motivate a lot of those people to show up and vote and try to make this happen. So that's my take on why I think they are announcing it. They want people to get momentum and support behind this.
Yeah.
So
I like that. Well, you know, this is what we all need to do. Take our own little piece of responsibility to help you know, have the government that we tolerate, that we're willing to, you know, engage with, either on the smallest local scale or, you know, my hope is that we bring back in-person ID verified paper voting.
We've never had ID verified voting, but yes, we need to bring, I mean,
yeah, that'd be good.
On the voting perspective, we need to make voting paper ballots, no machines at all.
Yeah.
It needs to be single day voting.
Yeah.
So election day only. None of this, you know, voting for weeks beforehand and weeks after.
The count's done within 24 hours. End of story.
No mail-in voting.
Yeah.
And you absolutely need voter ID.
Yeah.
If you just made those changes alone, you would significantly improve the credibility of elections, which at this point in this country are a complete farce.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, sometimes, you know, because I used to be a libtard, I like to call him. But I've, you know, come a long way.
Recovering.
Yeah, I'm recovering. Liberal per se. And, you know, interestingly enough, when I'm talking to those people sometimes, you know, I would say, hey, we actually want the same things. We really do. But because the media has been so effective at sending propaganda, brainwashing, dividing, confusing people, they've muddied the water so bad that there's this false sense of divide, when ultimately we all just want to be left to live our lives, be able to pay a reasonable legal tax, and move about our lives in a sensible way. And that's all being crunched down on now. So I think there has been a resurgence of people starting to scratch their heads and think, hey, wait a minute, you know, this is taking it too far. This is too much. I think, you know, they've overplayed their hand in a lot of respects. So there's a lot of people waking up, and that's what we need.
Well, that's a good thing. Speaking of waking up, great segue.
No.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams has finally woken up and realized that, and I quote, the surging migrant crisis will destroy the city. And it's going to come to your neighborhoods.
But wait, they were so, you know, excited to be a sanctuary city, right? Where they were so righteous, and their arms were open. And
well, this is why we need to talk about this on the show, because you have to understand, this isn't the mayor of New York City going, oops, we made a mistake and we didn't realize this was going to happen. They knew exactly what was going to happen, but they timed these things politically. So when it was advantageous for them to win an election, say like 2-3 years ago, they declared that they were a sanctuary city. It's all about human rights, and there's no such thing as an illegal human, and we'll take all of your immigrants, right? And so states like Texas said, okay, started putting them on buses and sending them to New York. Now, it's easy for New York to say we'll be a sanctuary city when they are thousands of miles away from the border where all these immigrants are coming in. Suddenly, they're showing up in busloads in New York City. And now Mayor Adams is saying, oh, This is terrible. This is unsustainable. This is going to destroy the city.
Oh, God.
Yeah, we all told you that when you declared New York a sanctuary city, right?
Yeah.
We knew this was going to happen. Look.
But is this not kind of like because it wasn't only 13 buses, and we have millions of immigrants coming into the country, which very few people are talking about, and then they take this like pretty small batch of immigrants and make a big fuss out of it? I mean,
compared to what states like Texas and Arizona and California are having to deal with, it is a small number. But it was more, I believe it was more than 13 buses.
Okay.
They've been sending quite a few of them over there.
Well,
that might have been the original push, but
this is a timing issue somewhat, right?
Well, so here's the thing. When it was politically expedient for them to look like they were all compassionate in order to win the election, they said, we'll take all your migrants. We're a sanctuary city. So, but now they're realizing, well, they've always known that this isn't sustainable. So they have to make a change in policy before the entire freaking city collapses, right? But they can't admit that this is a problem 6 months from now.
Yeah.
Or 9 months from now. So one of the things that you'll often see is they'll time these things such that if they announce this now, that they are now going to tackle this migrant crisis and they're going to stop taking migrants and they're no longer a sanctuary city, they've got almost an entire year for the blowback on that to settle down before the next election. And that is what this announcement is about. That's why the announcement is happening now. They're doing it now because everybody's going to point this out. We're all going to talk about it on our shows. We're all going to talk about what a hypocrite and what an idiot Eric Adams is, right? He's going to take that political heat and it's all going to die down, and they're just going to hope that people forget about it come the next election.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to mention on this show, you've got to start thinking about every time one of these stories hits the media. Because remember, the media is completely controlled by the far left. There's no doubt about that. Mainstream media is completely controlled by the radical far left. So if they're putting a story out there, it's because they're shaping a narrative. And then you always have to ask yourself, what is that narrative? Is it trying to cover up something else that's in the news? Is it politically timed to sway an election in one direction or another? You always have to ask yourself those questions because everything that you see is planned. There's a famous political strategist, I never remember his name, but he was quoted as saying, he's from the 80s, that during an election season, basically nothing is real. And what he meant by that is every single thing that you see happen, right, is planned. It was specifically planned to happen that way at that time.
Yeah.
Right? And you might be saying, yeah, but we're only in an election season every couple of years. Not true, because we have midterm elections now. So you notice that the election cycle generally starts 2 years before the actual election occurs. Year and a half to 2 years before. Well, now that we have elections every 2 years, we are in a perpetual election cycle.
Yeah.
So it never ends.
Yeah.
The second one election is over, you might have 2-3 months where things die down, and then boom, the next cycle starts right back up again.
Yeah.
So everything is being coordinated and timed within that framework.
Yeah. So there's distraction, right? There's confusion, and then just divide and conquer. Really, ultimately, right? I mean, this is part of the reason why we still only have a two-party system. Because I'd like to consider myself a libertarian, but because I stand by the Constitution more than anything, but you know, if we can just somehow continue to unite, there's hope.
All right. Well, I think we've covered that one enough.
Yeah.
I think you get the point on why it's important to hold Mayor Adams' feet to the fire on this one.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next one, which is a subject that really, really irritates me. But guess who's back? Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Guess who's back?
Take a deep breath.
I will not attempt to rap. I can sing, but I will not attempt to rap. Fauci's back.
Oh.
And Fauci's pushing masks again.
I thought he was supposed to go away.
Well, he may have stepped down, but he's not gone.
Masks again. Wait, didn't we hear him say they don't work and then they work?
Well, he said they don't work and then they work, and then he said they're mostly symbolic, and then he said they work, and then they said they don't work, right? He was all over the map on this because Fauci tells you whatever his masters want you to hear in that moment.
It's symbolic of slavery. I agree with that.
So keep in mind what's happening here. This is really important for you to understand. I'm sure most of the people that'll watch this video already get it, or they wouldn't be watching these videos. But if for some reason you came across this video and you don't get it, you have to understand what this is about. One of the main reasons why COVID was intentionally released onto the world was to cheat the elections. It's not the only reason, but it was one of the reasons. They needed a pandemic to usher in mail-in voting so that they could use the massive amounts of mail-in votes in order to cheat the election. Don't believe me? Just go find the New York Times article where they talked about, and I think this was prior to the 2016 election, I think, when they wrote this article. And the whole gist of the article was about how as you increase mail-in voting, you increase fraudulent ballots.
Yeah.
So even the New York Times admitted that that was the case back then. Why did they do that? Well, because back then conservatives were doing mail-in voting. But now they want to use mail-in voting, and they have in the last several elections to cheat. So now suddenly mail-in voting is great and there's no problem with it, and it's the safest election in the history of U.S. elections. Complete and utter bullshit. But this is what the whole mask thing, they're going to start ramping up COVID. They're going to start threatening lockdowns. They're already talking about it. I just read an article that Israel has already closed their schools down. So you're hearing a lot of talk about this. They're going to attempt to ramp up another fake pandemic, all for cheating the election. So masks are a big part of that. Now, interestingly enough, Fauci was on CNN, of course, CNN of all places. And he was confronted by the CNN anchor about the most recent study that proves that masks don't work.
Oh, wow.
Now, that was shocking because, I mean, if CNN is finally on board, then they realize that
Is it the Cochrane
they've
report
lost,
one?
they've lost the narrative.
That's legit.
So he was actually asked about that, and here was Fauci's answer. Well, on an individual, no, what did he say? When these studies looked at the whole, and on a whole level, the data doesn't suggest that they did anything to really stop the pandemic. But on an individual level, it actually works. Now, this is how they lie to you all the time.
Oh my God.
With words that sound like they might actually be legit. But if you just stop and use common sense for a second, think about this. If it worked for me on an individual level, and it worked for you on an individual level, and everybody else on an individual level, and we all wore them, then it would actually work on the larger level also. Right? This is the thing.
But is his logic that since not everyone complied, then collectively it didn't work?
No, that's not what he said. What he was basically saying is if everybody wore a mask, they themselves would be protected. But we wouldn't see a big change in the overall pandemic. Logically, that makes no sense whatsoever. But if you don't think about it, if you just go, and this is what a lot of people will do, they'll go, oh, well, it may not have changed that, but at least I'm safe.
Yeah.
No, you idiots.
No. Yeah.
If it didn't work, if it didn't slow down or have any impact whatsoever on the pandemic, then it obviously doesn't work at all.
Yeah, well, let's clarify, because they do work at causing you to suffocate. They do work at, displaying your compliance.
Well, even Fauci himself said it was mostly symbolic, meaning symbolic of compliance. But there's
a lot of negative effects with
and they're well documented. They've done a lot of studies on the negative effects on children, how it delayed their learning, how it was changing their facial features, how people were actually more sick as a result because of the toxins, not only from the chemicals in the mask, but from rebreathing all your air. There's a million reasons why they are harmful for you, and they've all been well documented. Some people may say, though, well, that's the risk that we take for being able to slow down, stop the pandemic, save yourself, whatever it is. Every recent study done shows they do nothing. less than nothing. They're actually harmful.
Yeah.
Even the N95s, because I know some people are going to go, well, that might be true of the surgical masks, but what about N95s? No, the study also showed that the N95s had no effect whatsoever. And worse than that, the N95s had more problems for you as the wearer than the loose-fitting surgical masks.
Yeah.
So technically, they were even worse for you.
So if you're double masking, take them both off and never put them on again, is my suggestion. But I am not a doctor, so.
So somehow they dug Fauci out of the grave and they stood him back up again.
Why couldn't his replacement just come out? Because she doesn't have the credibility yet, maybe, huh?
Yeah, nobody knows who she is yet, I guess.
Yeah, I heard she's evil as well, so.
All right, well, we got two more things that we really need to talk about
let's
here.
do it.
And we're running a little out of time. So the next one is the Liberty Safe betrayal. You may or may not have heard of this one. So the Liberty Safe company betrayed all of their customers. Here's something you may or may not know. If you have a safe with a digital lock, one where you can punch a code in real quick and get access to your safe.
I do.
Which, if you are safely storing your firearms, but you need them in an emergency, you're going to have that kind of safe, because if somebody kicks your door in, you're not going to go, hold on 1 minute, as you go 3 turns to the left and 4 turns to the right. Like, that's not going to happen. So you have a punch code, right?
Yeah.
Well, apparently every digital lock ever made has a master code. And the FBI had a warrant for a particular location. They were in this location. They found the safe. They did not have a warrant for the safe, by the way. They wanted access to it. So they called up Liberty Safe. They did not have a subpoena from a judge requiring Liberty Safe to give them the master code, but Liberty Safe just gave it to them anyway. Now, we don't know at this point whether or not that master code was specific to that lock or whether that is a generic master code that works on all Liberty Safes. Liberty Safe has since come out and said that they are going to change their policy and they're not going to do it again. But it's important to mention this because you think you buy a safe, you set your code, nobody can get into it except for a locksmith taking 4 hours to drill your safe apart. That is not true.
Yeah.
So
this is like a Bud Light debacle somewhat. I hope they feel the pain.
Well, yeah, I hope Liberty Safe gets Bud Lighted.
Seriously, they need to have a little bit of a tarnished reputation from
But the interesting thing is this. I mean, so yes, they deserve to pay the price financially for betraying their customers.
Yeah.
However, keep in mind, I have watched numerous videos now on this from locksmiths because I wanted to know from experts, like, okay, what's the deal here? Is this just Liberty or what? And there's only a couple of lock manufacturers. All these safe companies source their locks from these manufacturers, except I think one company makes their own. But they all have master codes. So whether your safe is made by Liberty or not, you've got this same problem. So apparently there are a few manufacturers where you can reset the master code if you have the proper instructions on how to do it. Which I believe also requires you having the original master code first.
Wow.
So you would have to reach out to your...
for that.
No, you'd have to reach out to the manufacturer and get the master code from them.
No.
Yes.
They won't send it to you. They'll have a locksmith come. I've had to have this done before where they won't give it to any individual. They'll only have a locksmith do that because they are credentialed or have the ability to keep it concealed.
If your safe was registered in your name and you could prove who you were, they might give it to you. They might not. In either case, you can't do that with all of them anyway. Some of them are absolutely not reprogrammable, so you're screwed.
Yeah.
So I would suggest that you have more than one safe and that you don't have anything that you wouldn't be okay with the feds seeing in your safe that has a digital lock. And then have everything else somewhere else. And if you're going to put it in a safe, put it in one that has a dial and that only you know the combination to. Now, keep in mind also that even on dial safes, it'll often come set from the factory a certain way. If you bought it from, a lock and safe company or something like that, they will generally set it, but they will keep a record of what they set it to. So you're going to want to have a locksmith come out and change it again when you get it. Now, that means, of course, your locksmith then knows the combination to your safe. And your locksmith is very much local, which means if he betrayed you, you'd be screwed too. So an even better suggestion is learn how to change it yourself, because you don't actually need a locksmith to do it. And change it so that nobody knows it except for you. Maybe a trusted family member.
Yeah, tall order, but hey, this is what we got to do these days.
Well, and, you know,
All right.
the main message on that one is, you know, don't trust anything digital. Don't trust any of these big companies.
Yeah.
Do everything you can to not have to rely on them. And when they F up like this, like Liberty Safe did, make them pay the price.
Yeah.
All right, last story is, and this is a big one, the New Mexico governor temporarily suspended the Second Amendment.
Attempted to, I think, is the correct
Well,
term.
she did it, whether or not it's I mean,
Well,
we all know it's unconstitutional.
Silly
a state
her.
cannot override the U.S. Constitution or any part of it for any reason for any amount of time. Now, she is claiming that there is a state of emergency over gun violence, and therefore they need to temporarily restrict the Second Amendment right. So basically, she was telling people that even if they had a permit, they were not allowed to carry a gun. So a couple of interesting things about that. First of all,
it's when you need it the most, right? With a bunch of potentially
well,
illegal aliens and
the
whoever else.
issue
in the
is
country.
this, is that criminals don't give a fuck
Yeah.
what the law says or what
No.
the governor says.
No.
The criminals are not the ones legally carrying with permits.
Yeah.
So when you do something like that, all you're doing is taking guns out of the hands of the good guys.
Yeah.
And now you've got just all the bad guys who are committing all the gun violence to begin with are still armed. So first of all, the theory behind it is absurd.
Yeah.
Right? But
But it
that's
sounds
not
good.
even the issue.
If you don't know better, it like, wow,
You'd-
guns bad.
you'd
Take guns away.
Sorry, but you'd have to be really stupid to think that sounds good.
It's a people problem, not a gun problem. All right,
That's
we
a
clear
whole
on
other
that?
issue.
All right.
So, but now let's take it a step further to the
Yeah.
broader issue, which is that no governor has the power to suspend any part of the Constitution. Now, a lot of people on the left will be, oh, this is great. Yeah, okay, all right. What about, they say they're going to temporarily suspend free speech? What about they're going to temporarily suspend the right to practice your religion, whatever it is?
Oh, this is kind of like the emergency powers that just kind of continued to be extended unjustifiably.
Right.
Local,
The point
state,
is
and
that
federal from the scamdemic.
even the people that would support this, which are obviously lunatics, wouldn't support it if it came to suspending something that they held to be sacred. Right. And you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
The Second Amendment, whether you like it or not, is the Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States and cannot be overridden or suspended by anyone. So there's already a whole bunch of lawsuits filed on this one. What I think is going to be most likely the favorable outcome here is she's absolutely going to lose this. I mean, I don't even think at this point a left liberal activist judge could justify this decision. And if they did, it would immediately go up to the Supreme Court and be overruled. But I think what's going to happen is she's going to lose massively in court, and that's going to set precedent. Now, here's what I also think that the left is hoping. I think that the left is hoping that they get a favorable ruling on this because they had to have known that this was going to happen. There's no way they thought they could get away with this. But I think that they are hoping that they get a ruling in favor of them that allows them to do this, and then that sets precedent for suspending any part of the Constitution during an emergency. Remember, if you give the government the power to enact certain laws or suspend certain rights during an emergency, they will always come up with a new emergency so that they can invoke their powers, right? You cannot suspend any part of the Constitution ever for any reason. And this is something a lot of people don't understand about the Constitution, because you will hear people on the left say things like, well, no part of the Constitution is absolute. Yes, it is. That is actually the entire point of the Constitution, is that what's written in there is absolute. In other words, you cannot change it.
Yeah.
That is literally the entire point of what's written in that document. So don't fall for that argument. It's complete BS.
Yeah.
It's rationalizing,
Yeah.
right? And it's basically paving the way for getting rid of the Constitution, which is what they really want to do because it's been a big hindrance to their global agenda.
Yeah.
So don't fall for it. And I think that the favorable outcome will be that we will get a ruling that shows that you absolutely cannot suspend any part of the Constitution ever, and that's going to work in our favor, which means it's going to backfire spectacularly in their faces.
Yeah.
I can't guarantee that, but I think that's what's going to happen, and I certainly hope that's what happens.
Well, that's incredible. Thank you, Kevin, for all that. And, hopefully many of you don't watch much mainstream news and support local media or independent media sources. PragerU is one of them I really enjoy, Epoch Times. And, we're really here to just help bring in some of these very kind of sensible frameworks. And this one, I think, like many of the others, is a problem, reaction, solution equation. So that's one of the things that many of you may already know, but we're going to keep addressing it because that is part of the way in which they play us like a fiddle if we let them. So we're going to continue to stand strong, use our discernment, stay free, stay healthy, and have a beautiful week. Thanks for watching.